There is a very specific kind of frustration that I keep hearing from people right now. They're showing up, they're putting out content, they're doing things the way they're told to do, the way we've always done them, the way we're supposed to do them, and the results feel slow, slower than expected, slower than they used to feel, slower than what they're watching other people on the internet talk about. And the story they're telling themselves is that something's wrong, that they're missing something, and that strategy's not working. I want to offer a different way to look at that today. Welcome back to She's Built Like a CEO. I'm Brooke. If you're building a business to fund the life you actually want, this is the show for you. This is where we're going to talk about what matters, what doesn't, and how to build accordingly so you can have the life you want and the business you dream of. Let's get into it. I don't want to call this a mindset episode, but it kind of is. It kind of is. There was a period in online business, and if you've been in this space for a few years, you remember it. Things moved fast. Post something, get followers, launch something, get buyers, show up consistently for a few months and watch the numbers climb. It was easier. At least it felt that way. If you just hit the right button, you could fly. And it doesn't feel that way anymore. That era shaped the expectations of a lot of us, and we're still carrying them. The idea that visibility converts quickly, that effort produces results in a shorter timeline, and if you're doing it all right, you should be seeing traction within a few weeks or a couple of months. Those expectations are now running headfirst into a market that operates completely differently than what we were used to seeing. Sales cycles are longer. Trust is taking longer to build. A person who finds you today might follow you for months before they even say hello to you or click buy. Sometimes they bypass saying hello. They might listen to a dozen of your episodes before they even consider something you might have to offer. They might read your emails for a year before they click a link in one. And that doesn't feel like it used to. If you've been doing this for a while, or if you've watched other people do this in the past, this doesn't feel the same. It used to be so much quicker. So we need to be a lot more careful with how we diagnose the problem in our business, because sometimes there isn't one. Sometimes it's just a very long sales cycle. Sometimes it's just the current reality of how buying decisions happen online now. We have to stop measuring our results against a timeline that no longer exists. It's funny because there are these channels that we used to label long game, right? We used to label blogging or Pinterest, SEO, email lists. People who invested in those were told up front, this takes time. The payoff is compounding, build it anyway. And most of us did because the expectation was set correctly from the start. You knew what you were signing up for. You sign up for Pinterest to do Pinterest. It could take you a year to see traction on Pinterest, but you knew that it could take up to a year, so you kept going. Social media never came with that disclaimer because it felt really fast early on, and it was. Organic reach was higher. Algorithms were rewarding new accounts. A post could go somewhere without much of an audience behind it. So founders built their strategies around that speed and benchmarked their results against it. That speed is gone. Social media is long game now. The runway from first impression to sale looks a lot more like the blogging timeline always has than the early Instagram timeline. And this isn't a new development. It's just more obvious now than it was 2 or 3 years ago. What we're seeing now is people taking the shortcut answer to the longer runway in doing ads. Pay to play is having a real moment right now. And it makes sense why. Because if organic reach is slower, buying reach feels like the logical response. Ads can absolutely be the right move for you at the right time for the right business and the right infrastructure behind them. A clear client path, a backend that converts, an offer that's been validated organically first. In that situation, ads accelerate something that's already working. Without those pieces in place, though, ads are going to accelerate the spend without accelerating your results. And that's a conversation for another episode, specifically the one we did a few weeks back on the 4 backend gaps showing up in founder businesses right now. And I'll put the link to that one in the show notes. For today, the point I want you to take away is simply this. Ads are tools. They are tools you can use. They are not a replacement for your runway. So the question begins then, well, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to handle this? The first shift that you need to make is how you measure progress. If you're measuring by sales alone, you're probably going to misread a lot of what's happening in your business. Not because that's not a good indicator, of course it is, but because the indicators that something is building is often going to show up before that revenue does. Email list growth, podcasting downloads trending, DMs from people who you've been following for months that are starting to ask questions. Those are runway indicators, and they're not nothing you need to pay attention to those. They're the thing that turns into sales on a longer timeline. The second shift is how you look at consistency, how you think about consistency. Consistency on a long game timeline looks completely different from consistency on a short game timeline. Short game consistency is sprint energy. Post every day, show up everywhere, saturate the feed. Where long-term consistency is steady presence over time. That kind of consistency feels quieter, doesn't feel quite as much like the hustle and the grind that we're used to seeing rewards from. It's the kind that compounds. The third shift is in how you make decisions. On a short timeline, a strategy that hasn't produced results in 60 days looks like a failure. But on a long timeline, 60 days is too early. The decision to scrap it or pivot or rebuild, every single time you do that, it's going to reset the clock. Every time you rebuild the offer and change the messaging or switch the platforms, you're starting that runway over. Staying the course on something that's building, even when it doesn't feel like it's building, is how you play the long game. And it's one of the more valuable things you can do in online business now. So, if the runway is longer and the timeline's further out than most of us planned for, the question becomes, what's worth building during that time? And the answer is infrastructure that will compound with you. A good example of this is an email list. Every person who joins your list is someone you can reach without an algorithm deciding whether they see you. And over time, that list becomes the most stable asset in your business. The founders who built lists 5 years ago and kept nurturing them are less affected by every platform shift than the ones who built audiences they don't own. A clear client path is another thing. We went deep on this on a recent episode, what it looks like when it's missing and why it has to be clear before anything else gets built. The short version, when the path from stranger to client is mapped and working, every piece of content you create, every lead magnet you build, every email you send has a clear job to do. And that clarity will compound. It makes the long game shorter than it would be otherwise. And back-end systems are the last thing I'm going to talk about today, because the people who are going to weather this market and the next shift after it are the ones whose businesses don't depend entirely on them showing up and doing everything manually every single day. When the back end is running, the business is running. When you step back, things don't fall apart. That's what makes growth sustainable instead of exhausting. And you are already exhausted knowing you've got a long runway ahead of you to get there. Obviously, none of these things are going to produce results overnight. All of them produce results that will hold. In my opinion, online business has always been long game. So if your timeline is feeling off right now, I think you should ask yourself whether the timeline you're measuring against is the one that still exists. And if the answer is no, what does building for our actual timeline look like for you and for your business now? That's the work. It's not glamorous, but it's the work that holds. If you want to talk through what's actually happening in your business, that's why I'm here. The link to contact me is in the show notes. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next Tuesday.